destruyendo.
Plan a wonderful trip to Havana, hop on a ship and I'll see you in sea.
His name is Paul, but for over 40 years everyone has called him Pablo. He arrived to Cuba when he was 14 years old, along with his mother, the great singer Barbara Dane, with the intention of studying music for a year, but he decided to stay and live in Cuba. Love, he has said, helped him decide. He is the founder and leader of Mezcla, a band that is one of the main Cuban exponents of jazz, fused with African and Caribbean rhythm. Well, Maestro, thank you for accepting our invitation. It's an honor for us to be here with you and to talk today from Havana. Thank you a lot.
Okay, well, I'm a big fan of Telesur, so okay.
Well, first of all, you were born in Oakland, California, not Oklahoma as people used to say, in Oakland. But you are Pablo. Pablo.
Well, Pablo Menéndez. My last name is Menéndez because my grandfather was actually from Spain. He had immigrated and been assimilated and was practically divorced from his original culture. So he was lived most of his life in New York, and my father was born in New York, but I was born in Oakland, California. And my mother and my father named me Paul after a great American artist named Paul Robeson. And I was very proud of that name, but when I came to Cuba, everyone would say Paul. And I would say, no, Paul. So I said, well, Pablo sounds better and it's easier to pronounce. So Pablo Menéndez has been my artistic name in Cuba since I've been playing music, which is now going on 48 years or something like that. So
Your mom was the great Barbara Dane. But how was that environment, that musical environment at home, that made you become a
well,
musician?
my mother and both my mother and my father, but my mother actually was and is one of the great singers of the United States, one of the great artists of the United States. Because of her political activism, she's not as well known as other artists, but she, at one point in the 60s, had her own TV show and was on the cover of different magazines, and is considered like forerunner of many different musical styles. She is one of the first white blues singers of importance in traditional jazz also, and she's sung music from around the world, folk music. She's part of the whole movement of giving importance to folk music, and that's one of the reasons that she was invited to Cuba in 1966. She was the first public person from the United States to defy the State Department ban on travel to Cuba. And she came here in 1966 and was part of a whole effort by the government to teach people and to declare to the world that the people of the United States were never the enemy. The enemy of the Cuban Revolution was the aggressive policies of the imperialist government, but not the people of the United States. So music from the United States, rock and roll, jazz, blues, all of that folk music was okay and was part of the musical cultural exchange that could be. She was so impressed with what she saw of young people in Cuba at the time in 1966, and she was thinking about me because I was about 2 or 3 years before what was happening to young people in the United States was basically that they were being drafted for the imperialist war in Vietnam. And so she thought it would be a real good idea for me to come and study music at one of the art schools that she had seen in Cuba. And I was very excited to come to a country that practically nobody from the United States had come to for around 7 years, and to do something that no one else of my generation was going to do. It was really exciting to come, and also to study music at a music school was something that I always wanted to do, but we really didn't have the economic possibilities to do that in the United States. So all of a sudden I had almost anything I could dream of. And the idea was that I would be in Cuba for 1 year, studying at the National School of Art, a live-in school which took care of all of my, had the dormitories and all the health care and the food. And the thing is, at the end of that year, I was just getting to be involved in everything. In fact, when I was about to leave the United States, my father gave me some really good advice. He said, you know, you're going from the United States, and a lot of times people from the United States make the mistake of asking people in other countries, hey, why don't you do things the way we do it in the United States, as if the United States was perfect. And everyone knows that the United States is not perfect. So in a small, very nationalistic country like Cuba, people will resent that. So he said, why don't you keep your mouth shut and try to figure out what makes them tick, what works for Cubans. So that's what I was doing the first year, was trying to assimilate as much as possible, learn as much as possible of Cuban history, of Cuban music, of Cuban culture. And it became so much a part of me that at the end of that year, I told my mother, well, you know, listen, I would like to stay a little bit longer. And she said, yeah, okay. So it ends up now being, I guess, 52 years that I've been living in Cuba.
You were 14 years old at the time when you came.
I was 14 years old, actually. And, you know, people say, oh, you were very young. But my mother had done a very good job of creating independent young people. We had been brought up very much involved in her musical life, which, you know, as you were saying, was all the time there was jam sessions, rehearsals, things going on in my house. And she would take us to sometimes to the festivals where she was playing, or different clubs and around the country. So I was very much involved in music before coming to Cuba, and also very, what you would say, precocious. As a 14-year-old, I was already had a lot of independence, which made it easy for me to come to a different country, to start to learn a different language. I had very intensive studies in Spanish, and learned a totally different political system, economic system, cultural system. And at the same time, I think as an example of how mature I was, I actually fell in love with a fellow student at the art school, and a young actress, and we got married when I was 15 years old. My mother had to come and sign the papers because I was underage, but that marriage lasted for 44 years until my wife passed away from after 20 years of successful struggle against breast cancer. But she was one of the most important actresses of Cuban drama and theater, Adria Santana. And so, you know, but just to say that at 15, I knew very much what I wanted, and my mother knew that, so that's why she respected my desire to stay in Cuba and, you know, continue to make Cuban music.
Okay, you were a part of the Grupo de Experimentación Sonora del ICAI. Can you tell me about that experience and how that was part of the, let's say, the foundations of Mezcla?
Well, yeah, this band at the Film Institute was actually just an incredible experience. The Film Institute was one of the cultural institutions born with the Cuban Revolution. And so it didn't have to change or transform something that already existed. It was something that was actually born, and they had a very good sense of bringing in young talent and having them train in all of the technical things, and film directors, and the Cuban films that were being made at the time were really exciting, and they wanted to have a soundtrack that would be on the same level of being something new and something very Cuban. So they brought in a group of young rebellious young people from different genres and different styles of music, different backgrounds, and put them together in what you would call a think tank or something, because we actually didn't have a production quota. It was something where we were studying in musical technique. The founder of the group, one of the world's greatest ever classical guitar composers and musicians, Leo Brouwer, had the idea that the regular music schools would take too long to form a musician, and that you could actually in 3 or 4 years have, especially popular musicians, have them already, you know, learning everything that you could learn at school. So he made a very intensive course where we were studying musical technique, but at the same time we had a lot of group debate and discussion, studying the history of Cuban music, what was happening around the world, And the idea was that instead of being influenced by whatever was popular or stylish or being sold by the big record transnationals in the metropolis in the United States, for example, that we could see a little bit of what was happening around the world in Asia and Africa and Latin America, in Cuban history, and in the United States, what was the most progressive and most revolutionary music that was happening, jazz, rock and roll, all of the things that were happening, and try to find a way of making Cuban music on that level. So it was really an exciting group to be in, and some of the singer-songwriters that came into the band were very, very famous later singer-songwriters like Silvio Rodriguez, who is one of the greatest of all times in the Spanish language, Pablo Milanés, singers like Sara González, composers like Noel Nicol, Eduardo Ramos, jazz musicians like Emiliano Salvador, composers like Sergio Vitier, jazz musicians like Leonardo Acosta, who was also a great writer on Cuban jazz and Cuban music. So we were at the Film Institute from around 1970 to around 78, 79 maybe, and then each one of the different musicians involved in that became at the same time leaders of their own projects. And basically, in my sense, in Mezcla, we've been trying to continue with this tradition of being kind of you know, experimental terrain where we could try out different things, and also one of the things about mezcla, you know, when I say mezcla, I'm talking about mixture. And for me, everybody in humanity is a mixture. They say that humanity was born in Africa and that it went out and populated the rest of the world. But everywhere in the world, culture progresses and the countries become better when they have the fusion, the mixture of different parts of humanity coming together. And of course, the biggest ever was a mixture of various nationalities of Africans, various nationalities of Europeans in the Americas. So the United States and Cuba, for example, have that in common, and it's the same tradition. But the African element did not come voluntarily. So after 500 years of cultural genocide and racism, oppression, slavery, the African diaspora is the most dynamic. The culture, the resistance culture, the survival culture of the African diaspora is the most dynamic element in popular music and other elements of culture in the world. So if you go anywhere, you couldn't imagine life on this planet without rock and roll, without blues, without jazz, without reggae, without son, without samba, without salsa, without son, rumba. Anything that you listen to in popular music in the world is going to be influenced by that sense of survival, of resistance. And in the 60s, they used to say, well, oh, we're going to change the world with our music. You can't change the world with your music, but the world sure is a better place with music than without music. So it does make it easier to face all of these different things. And one thing about mezcla also, and me particularly, as I say, my mother was a blues singer. She was involved in jazz. Those musics were discriminated against in the United States. And in Cuban culture, when I arrived in Cuba, there was confusion about things like rock and roll, about jazz, like the different African-based music, Yoruba music, rumba. There was a process of learning about the cultural importance and giving them their place of dignity in Cuban culture, opening up the possibilities also so that people could have the freedom to listen to all of these things and have a wider, richer cultural life, musical life. So I became involved in all of these different genres. I was, you know, like Cuban rap, Cuban rock and roll, Cuban jazz, Cuban Yoruba music, you know, bringing it into mainstream instead of having it be some sort of museum piece. Rumba, which is for me the first music born in Cuba of the elements that came from all over the world, but basically different African nationalities and different European influences. And so that's been the struggle. And to tell you the truth, a lot of young people today might say, oh, what's the use of struggling? Why are you going to go against the current? Why don't you just do whatever wisdom tells you is the way to make a lot of money and be famous? And it's impossible to change the world. And I think about this for a minute and say, well, from when I started making music to now, there is a huge difference. When the Nueva Trova movement in Cuba started, they were like making music, playing songs at a party for like 10, 20 people maybe in somebody's living room. And that came up to the point where at one point in Havana, and Mezcla was a part of this, 10 bands played for 500,000 people in the Plaza de la Revolución. That's 25% of the population of the city of Havana, which is 2 million people. So if you think about it for a minute, now we have rock festivals in Cuba, we have rap festivals in Cuba, we have jazz festivals in Cuba, we have Yoruba music festivals, rumba festivals. People from all over the world are seeing all of the riches of Cuban music that used to be marginalized or misunderstood. So I think it is possible to change the world, and I'm very inspired by the process of doing that. In fact, every day we make, do something that is more exciting with our music and the band, and it just gets better and better.
In that line, you have said that you play what you feel in your heart, and to get fashionable in music is not a good advice.
See, the difference is that in Cuba, instead of musicians or artists having to think about paying the rent, or what am I going to do? I have to send my kids to college, or I have to pay the hospital bills, or how am I going to eat this month? All of this, those major problems in Cuba don't exist because we have free, most of us live rent-free and free medical care, free education for our kids. So, and in the arts, there's actually, as much as the poor country, the government of Cuba can, they try to provide constant employment for artists, and there's a lot of supports for the arts. You go to other countries, I mean, even the United States doesn't have a Ministry of Culture. It doesn't exist, right? So artists have to sell their arts, and they have to be dominated by the dictatorship of commercial arts. Now, in Cuba, as soon as I saw that, hey, wait a minute, we're free from that, then what is the thing that dictates what I have to do? My own heart. What do I believe in? What does my spirit think is going to help provide something, to offer something to the rest of the people that live around me, to my neighbors, to my neighborhood, from my country, Cuba, and my country, the United States, and the people of the world. So that's the only thing that makes me decide we're going to play this or say or do whatever. And to tell you the truth, I find that a lot of people have like more than one style of music. And I feel sorry for people that only like one style of music, because they're impoverishing their own cultural life. So the more different types of arts or different types of music you can enjoy, the greater the riches of your cultural life, and the more you get. So when we play that, some people understand it, enough people, that we've had a pretty successful career, and we've traveled around the world and played in practically all the continents, and for people around the world that have never even heard of us before. So even though we don't sell 1 million records or make $1 million, which wouldn't necessarily be a good thing, but to reach a lot of people, when we go and play at a festival, and all of a sudden maybe there's 20, 30,000 people that never heard us before, they usually are very enthusiastic at the end of the performance and applaud us very much and invite us back. So I'm very happy about what we've been doing in music.
What will be your definition of Latin music?
Okay, every definition of musical styles has to do with the marketing of Cuban music. Music in general is called something because they want to sell it. And that's what I say about the wisdom of the market, is that if you make one style of music, it's easier to sell you. So it's not easy to sell a band that plays many different styles of music, but this doesn't correspond with reality. So Latin music is a name that they invented in the United States because you could say Cuban music, but Cubans are a very small minority in the United States. There's, you know, maybe 30 times more Mexicans. So Latin music is one of these labels, and all of the labels in music, any style, has to do with how to sell it. And the wisdom of the marketplace is always that if you make one type of music, then it's easier to sell it. Oh, they make this type of music. But people want all sorts of musics. So mezcla was just a name that we invented to say, yeah, we make a mixture of different things, and maybe you can get that. And when you see the band, then you understand what we're talking about. But Latin music is because, for example, in the United States, there are people from, the great majority would be from Mexico, or from, then you have Dominicans, you have Puerto Ricans, you have Cubans, but you have people from all over Latin America. And when they want to say, okay, these are not black or white, and they have different euphemisms actually, because they say classic rock or urban music, when they in reality are talking about different social groups, different racial groups that they want to sell things to. So if you follow what I'm saying about my musical style being a mixture, then we do everything possible to subvert that. The whole thing about the band is that we would like to have black people, Latin people, white people, Asian people in the audience, and everybody enjoying things together, because I think that humanity is capable of enjoying things together and realizing that we're all on one planet and all part of the same one humanity. So when you see the band Mezcla right now, also it's like in you know, microscopic, not only musically, but actually you can see that there is different ages, different nationalities, different genres, sexes, right? Different people making music together harmoniously. And I think that represents really not only the way we feel about the world, but what we want to project to the world. So it's like I say, the only word I can think of is mezcla. Nicolas Guillen, Cuba's national poet, used to say, had a poem where he said, todo mezclado, everything is mixed. And that, I think, is something that the Caribbean has always been about. You can't imagine any pure race in the Caribbean, because when the Spanish came, the Europeans came, they wanted to exploit the native population, indigenous population, so extremely that they basically almost killed all of the original inhabitants of the Caribbean. And that's why they started to bring people to do their work from all over the world, but also they brought in people from all over Europe, and this region of the world is one of the most mixed regions of the world. But anywhere you go, every country and every place, the more of a mixture that you have, it's like I say, the richer the culture is, and the musical culture, and for me, political, everything is like easier for people to understand the world, I think, also if you lived in something. And this comes from something that actually I learned at home with my mother, because she was, as a young, rebellious 18-year-old, had the opportunity to go to the first World Youth Festival in Prague, Czechoslovakia in 1947. And she saw people, young people from all over the world, making music together, representing their own culture, but also interacting with people from all over the world, all of the different races, all of the different nationalities. And this marked her forever. She then, to her children at least, was doing that, and in her career always. And she is now 91 years old and is still making music and still singing and still doing wonderful concerts. So she lives in Oakland, California now, and is making every concert that she does now, I try to go and travel and play with her, because they're all historic events now, because at age 91, she really is one of the most important artists of all times in the United States. You can see her on the internet. That's one good thing about internet. So Google Barbara Dane, and you can see her. And also Google and go to YouTube, and you can see about Mezcla, Pablo Menéndez and Mezcla.
I have. Well, it's been a huge honor and a truly pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for this opportunity, Maestro.
You know, you said something in one of the questions, and you were asking about, is there anything that you want to say to the audience in general of Telesur? And Telesur just started now to be visible in places all over Africa, the whole continent of Africa, all over Latin America, and you can see it on the web also. So Telesur actually has a very diverse audience. And I'm hoping that young people will try to see it also, because it's important to have alternative sources of information, not only to listen to one version of what is happening. And Telesur has correspondents around the world. And so there's a contradiction. When you talk about having correspondents all over the world and being able to go and make a program, for example, from Cuba, then that takes a little bit of money. And yet, most of the messages of a lot of the arts in the world right now, and you know, people are always telling young people, oh, the only way to be happy is to be rich and famous. More money you have, the happier you are. And I think that I discovered many years ago that this is not true in the least, and that rich people usually have a very hard time. They feel very alone because they can't have real friends. Because if someone comes to be their friend, they're afraid somebody's going to take away their money. And maybe they only want to get near me because of their money, so they don't trust people. And to have love and friendship, you have to trust somebody, right? Rich people are always very afraid that somebody's going to steal from them, somebody's going to rob, somebody's going to take something from them. People that don't have anything don't have those worries, right? So, of course, you need some money to be able to live, but not rich and famous is not the way to be happy. Actually, to do what you believe in, to fight and to see the world become better because you are struggling for something that actually does give a better life to people around you, and to contribute to the, you know, the progressive growth of humanity. And you know, the national poet of Cuba, Jose Marti, once said in a book, the introduction to a poem book that he wrote for his newborn son, Ismailillo, he said, I have faith in the possibility of human beings becoming better. I have faith in the utility of being good. And speaking to his newborn son, I have faith in you. And I always say to the audience and to people in general, I have faith in people. So that's, for me, the true happiness is also, it's not because somebody's totally crazy. No, I just want to be good. No, it's egotistical. I want to go to sleep at night thinking I'm a good person, I've never done any harm to anybody, and I'm doing what I believe is right. So I feel better. So for me, that's the formula of what makes me be happy with all of these years of making music, and to think that right now I'm still starting on a very exciting adventure of making better music and reaching more people and doing what I believe in.
Well, thank you so much again, and it's been an honor.